Hey everybody, welcome, and thank you for listening to this episode of Marriage Therapy Radio. My name is Zach Brittle, and I am in Japan, or I'm probably in Japan, depending on when you're listening to this. Because I'm away from my microphone, we're having a little bit of a twist episode of the podcast today. I recently did an interview with Dr. Nazanin Moali from Sexology. She and I talked about sex and how relational dynamics affect the way things work in the bedroom. I really enjoyed the conversation. It's just she and I. She's asking me all the questions. So again, it's a little bit of a twist on our usual format, but I do think I'm going to spend some time in the next year or so talking a little bit more about how sex and sexuality works for couples. As you know, Rebecca and I are empty nesting. So we are reevaluating a lot of different parts of our relationship, including our sex life. And it's actually been kind of fun to think through different categories and different ideas. You've heard me talk, I'm sure, about how I think sex works for couples. And so, yeah, this is, just consider this like maybe, I don't know, the first installment of an expanding catalog of conversations about sex and sexuality on Marriage Therapy Radio. In this case, we talk about contempt in particular and about how it can really kill the way things work for you in the bedroom. I also like to reverse engineer stuff. If contempt is a killer in the bedroom, what's the solution? The solution is something like appreciation. It's something like joy or play. Rebecca and I recently got a book called Sex is Fun, just to help kind of recategorize the way you think about sort of your midlife, post-baby sex, or at least the way that we do. We also got a subscription to OMGS. OMGS is a platform that has a whole bunch of videos, primarily for women, about how sex and sexuality works. And we've loved it. I think knowledge is power. You know, learning from different folks about how the body works and how sexuality works and how psychology of sex works has been very illuminating for us. It is a website primarily for women. It is definitely designed for and produced by women to help women gain more confidence. But I think I've learned a ton, and I think competent, careful, attentive men can also learn quite a bit from just sitting down either by themselves or with their partner. The site is explicit. There's a lot of graphic videos and descriptions, but it's not gratuitous. It's actually very tasteful, and I'm grateful for the folks who have put this thing together in a way that really does inspire confidence. So if that's you, if you're in the market, Marriage Therapy Radio also has an affiliate agreement with OMGS, and I'm honored to be partnering with them. The best way to support the podcast and also check out the site is to go to marriagetherapyradio.com and click on the link that we have there. We'll get a little bit of a kickback, but even if you don't do that, you'll hear me continue to talk about this topic over the next several months as we continue to learn more and try to expose some insight into how this whole thing works for couples. It's a big topic in my office. Why not have it be a big topic on the podcast for now? Again, I want you to enjoy this conversation that I had with Dr. Moali and on her podcast, which is called Sexology. You can check that out at Spotify or Apple Podcasts, wherever you check your podcasts. And then when I get back from Japan, we'll have some more couples to talk to. There are a whole bunch of interviews that I'm excited to share, and then, of course, more to come. So for now, this is a very cool conversation. Stick around.
Today, we're talking about one of the most common reasons desire quietly disappear in a long-term partnerships, even when love is still there. So many couples come into therapy saying our problem is sex, but often sex is just a symptom. What's actually running the relationship underneath is something far more subtle and far more powerful called negative sentiment override. My guest today is Zach Brittle, a licensed mental health counselor, certified Gottman therapist, and relational life therapist who has spent nearly 20 years helping couples repair trust and emotional connection. He's the host of Marriage Therapy Radio and the author of The Relationship Alphabet and Marriage Therapy Journal. In this episode, we unpack how negative sentiment override shows up in real life, how it changes the way we experience our partner's tone, their intention, and read everyday interactions. We talk about why the first step out of this pattern isn't positivity, but emotional neutrality, and how quiet forms of contempt slowly erode sexual desire, even in couples who still deeply care about each other. We also explore something I hear all the time in my practice. Everything looks great on paper, but the spark is gone. Zach explains how NSO becomes a silent bedroom killer and what the first emotional shift look like when couples begin to heal and intimacy starts to come back online. And before we dive in, a personal note. For the first time in a very long time, I've recently graduated several clients altogether from my practice, which means I have a few limited openings for coaching. If today's topic resonates and you're looking for expert, compassionate support, you can book an appointment using the link in the show notes with me. All right, let's get into episode 479. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Sexology Podcast. I am so excited to welcome Zach Brittle to our show. Zach, welcome to our show.
Thanks for having me.
I am so excited to have another therapist talk about the patterns they see in their practices. And as a sex therapist, I always notice how relationships, and I'm sure that's a pattern that you see outside the bedroom, really impacts people's erotic connection. So welcome to our show. One thing that you talk about is very interesting. Your writing is NSO. So it's negative sentiment override. Can you tell us a little bit about what do you mean by that?
Yeah, sure thing. That term is not unique to me. That is a term that comes out of the research that was conducted by John Gottman and his team when they were kind of researching what makes relationships work. John is a funny character in the sense that in the therapy world, in the sense that he doesn't primarily identify as a therapist. He identifies as a researcher, mathematician, scientist, and he was not interested in helping people. He just wanted to know what worked and what didn't work. So he watched couples in these longitudinal studies over a number of years, and each couple had a metric. They had a ton of metrics, ton of different research metrics, but one of them was a SO metric, and that stands for sentiment override. So when couples were in positive sentiment override, meaning they had more positive than negative sentiment, then everything was easier. Neutral things took on a positive energy and negative things lost their power. When they weren't, when there was more negative sentiment than positive sentiment, that's called NSO, negative sentiment override. Everything's harder. Neutral things take on a negative energy. Positive things lose their power. So NSO is really kind of a metric or a marker, like a qualifier of where a couple sits kind of in the standard sentiment range. I'm not a scientist, so I don't know how to talk about it exactly, precisely, but yeah, basically it means there's more bad than good, and that often colors everything else, especially, or maybe including, maybe even especially what's going on in the bedroom.
I always talk about it like a bank account, like when you're overdraft, like you don't have anything to use, like if an emergency comes up or you want to do an activity. And as you said, it can really impact people's sex life. Can you tell us about what have you noticed? Like if there are stories that you've noticed that negative sentiment override impacted your clients or people that you know around you that impact their sex life?
Well, like I said, everything's harder when you're in an SO. I mean, you probably get the opportunity in your job to talk about how people can execute in the bedroom, how they can make experiences more pleasurable, how they can make it more, mutually satisfying. Couples that are in an SO have a hard time getting to the bedroom. They don't like each other. They don't have the kind of the built-in equity, if we use your bank account metaphor, to even begin to think about intimacy. Of course, when you're thinking about intimacy, sexual intimacy is just one of them, one type of intimacy. But these couples sometimes don't even have the base emotional intimacy or intellectual intimacy to help them feel solid enough to risk into sexuality. So a lot of the NSO, the consequences of NSO are, again, well before you ever even have to try and solve the sex life issue. It's how do we feel safe enough to risk vulnerability that sexuality, like healthy sexuality requires. NSO makes that really hard.
What I've noticed that this a little bit is black and white and gendered. But what I see with many heterosexual couples that I work with, for women, like having a better kind of like relationship, the kind of like equity that we talk about outside the bedroom is more important for having connection in the bedroom. But I know for many men, if there are some ruptures or challenges, they are able to at times compartmentalize it better. So I'm kind of curious, what's been your observation around that?
I think there's certainly that myth and that metaphor that women use sex to get love and that men use love to get sex is another way of putting it. Like women need to feel more emotionally connected in order to feel well connected. Men will rely kind of on the physicality or the sexuality of it. And I think that exists. What I've really noticed too, that I think the longer I'm at this, the more it's kind of leveled out. I mean, men are having a hard time initiating. Women are having a hard time initiating. Women who are feeling more empowered may actually begin to sort of lean into their sexuality because they're not getting what they want emotionally. And so the men are like, wait a second, I don't want just a detached, selfish lover. I mean, it's crazy. Like the dynamic is shifting so much under our feet. The world that I grew up in, I don't know how old you are, I'm 52, but like the world I grew up in is almost unrecognizable from the world I live in now in terms of how fast the news cycle is and where information's coming from, and access to sexuality and sexual information is like a millionfold versus, what I had access to. So I think that the old school tropes aren't as solidified as they maybe once were. I think I'm noticing it's changing quite a bit is maybe the answer to your question.
I hear you on that. And I think it's just I feel like, as you write, part of it is how you socialize, right? Mm-hmm. I think like different generations socialize differently. And what I've noticed kind of in a more of a kind of global, even if you zoom out, women are better with having kind of like casual, more self-focused experiences and out of a long-term relationship. But there's something happens in long-term relationships that for many women, the relational element gets more powerful, and that's impact their sexual connection with the partner. But for couples that they are inside the relationship, how do we know that we are in this SNO pattern?
How do you know that you're in negative?
What does it feel like? Yeah.
It feels gross, right? I mean, you feel up and, I think, a conversation I have a lot with couples is this notion of love versus like. I have people tell me all the time, oh, I love them. I know I love them and I don't want to get divorced. I just don't like them very much. And so, sometimes I'll ask this question and it's a thought experiment, but you tell me how it plays for you. You want some pasta. So you put the water on the stove and you boil it, or you turn the heat on. You get the box of pasta out, you put it next to the pot, and then you go sit down and you get distracted. You get distracted by Instagram or the crossword puzzle or the news or talking to your sister on the phone or something, and your partner comes in, they see that the water's boiling, and they take the box, they pour it into the water, right? What does your brain do? What do you do next with your brain?
I said, thank you.
Okay.
My brain's like, oh, thank you. Hallelujah. Yeah. One less thing on my list.
Right. That's more of a positive sentiment override response, right? So there are some people who would say, and I've heard this answer before, they go, well, I would say, why did you do that? I was going to do that. I was just needed a couple more minutes with the crossword, and then I would have been fine. That's more of a negative sentiment override answer. The act of pouring pasta into a pot of water is a neutral act. So I think for us to gauge, like, how are these neutral things playing in my house? Are they playing with a negative kind of edge to them? Or are they playing with gratitude and they're playing with curiosity? That's how you know. So I use that pasta example all the time, and you get a wide range of answers, and people are often surprised to hear themselves signal that their response is less than gracious, less than kind. It's protective, it's defensive. And that's, I think, if you're looking for cues, it's probably in the realm of like, how do these neutral things play? What is my brain doing in response to neutral things? I think one of the secrets in a healthy relationship is to appreciate that almost everything is neutral. Like that the garbage didn't go down to the curb on Thursday. It's not earth-shattering. It's not going to change the world. It's not a relationship. It's not a referendum on the relationship. It's actually just a thing that happened. And so do you go, oh, I'm going to roll with this thing that happened? That's easier to do in PSO than they never take down the garbage and now it's going to stink all week long and do that. So I think I've answered your question.
No, you did. And I think that's such a beautiful example, right? I'm sure like depending on what season of life people are, what's happening, the responses can be different. And you're right that when we have more but better interaction with our partner, it shows what's happening underneath. So you talk about the first step, isn't it going to the positivity, which I love, right? I feel like sometimes we are in this loop of feeling that like, oh, fake it until you make it, which is just so not working for so many people. You say it's stepping into emotional neutrality. But sometimes when we are in a partnership, that's very difficult because there is accumulation of resentment and frustration. How can we motivate ourselves to step into emotional neutrality? And what would that look like?
Well, maybe before stepping into emotional neutrality is just to minimize the negative, just to pause and to stop. Maybe don't say the thing. When the thing is about to come out of your mouth and it's ungracious or unkind or unnecessary, maybe just don't say it. That could be the beginning. I think that presumes that you have some self-awareness and some capacity to slow down. And if you don't have the capacity to slow down, then I think, this idea of moving into neutrality is learn to slow down. Literally, learn to slow down, learn to slow your brain down. And for me personally, that's come through cultivating a practice around mindfulness. I don't want to sit here and be like the mindfulness guy or somehow like try and recruit people into meditation. But I know that when I started to learn how to meditate, it was a reflective practice and it was, meditative and kind of cerebral, but it also was just an actual practice of rewiring my brain to pause between impulse and response, And so without trying to be too esoteric about it, if you're not good at it, practice. Like sometimes practice, this is where the practice like really kicked in for me, which was learning about the thing that happened to my eardrum, which was a sound. And then the meaning that my brain made out of it, which was a response. And there's, 4 inches of distance between my eardrum and my frontal lobe. And really kind of just messing around with like, what options do I have between those 4 inches? Like, what I could choose to be annoyed. You hear the sound of a dog barking. I could choose to be annoyed by that, or I could pause and choose to be like kind of happy at the sound of a dog barking because they were bringing joy to the girl who owned it. I don't know. Like I just knew I had options. Once I started playing with options, it became a lot more. It became a lot easier to focus on the things that could be positive. And I'm not a Pollyanna guy. That's one thing I want to be really clear about. Like I'm not here going, just think the positive. Like just assume the best. Believe that. That's not my goal. But it doesn't serve me to think negatively. It doesn't serve me. It makes my heart, makes my blood pressure rise. It makes me red in the face. It makes me bad at decision making. Like I don't want to do that. So I'm going to see if I can belay that long enough to actually make a choice for you and me in our population, a choice on behalf of intimacy.
I love that, like slowing down. And there's just like so many different variations, right? In acceptance and commitment therapy, saying that noticing it. And is it like aligned with my value? If I want to kind of like attack the partner, how is that in this moment? Is it functional or not? And I love that. And in relationships, sometimes people have this fear of, if I give in, right? If I change my position, my partner will continue to push. Like sometimes we find ourselves in these dynamics and people feel like they are in battlefield. So constantly in this place of hyper arousal and kind of like focusing on what's happening is just so dysregulating. I love the idea of mindfulness meditation, but how can we look into what parts do we own? What do we do to create this NSO situation? Because it's always a two-person dance.
Well, I have a personal answer that is probably more relevant to me than a professional answer. But the personal answer is I've come to accept that most often when I'm upset with something, that's more about me than it is about them. And I've done a lot of like internal personal work to just examine like, what does that come from for me and why I'm upset about that? And what is it about? And sometimes I blame my dad, and sometimes I blame my college girlfriend, and sometimes I blame my arthritic hip, or sometimes I blame, I cultivated a practice of assuming that I have responsibility here. Then I actually exercise that responsibility. And when I say responsibility, I always mean ability to respond. And I know that 100% of the time I have a choice to respond in a way that makes the relationship better or that makes it worse. I know I have that choice. And so again, for me, if it's a question about like, how do I do with my resentment, or what do I do if my partner's not cooperating? I sort of just take them out of the equation. And I go, what should I do with my resentment? Well, I take some responsibility, and then I try to respond in a way that makes the relationship better. And that's, again, I think I've answered your question, but when you're trying to do therapy and you've got two people in front of you, you have to somehow figure out how to sell that to both of them, you know? And ideally what you get is one or both of them saying, I can see why you're resentful. I can see how I played a part in that for you. You know, like that's ultimately what I think we're chasing.
I agree with you. And I think what's very powerful is when we're going into couples therapy, or if we want to examine things, openness and willingness to look at our contribution. Like even if we don't want to own it with our partner, which hopefully you have a relationship that you can own your part, that's very powerful. But knowing that you play a role in this dynamic. It's not like all your partner. Like you play a role, and if you want a different outcome, you can change that role. It's very interesting. When I was in graduate school, I went to this seminar that they were teaching couples therapy with only one person. They were talking about the person ready to be leaving the relationship, and you're working with the other partner who's desperate to keep the relationship. It can be very interesting for people to see what shows up when they're looking at their pattern. One of the things that you talk about, which comes from the Gottman approach, is the role of contempt and how it can contribute to that NSO cycle. So how does contempt show up in long-term relationships?
I used to think contempt was I hate you, but contempt is I'm better than you. And so we create this aura of grandiosity. We create this like hierarchy in most of our relationships. And sometimes we gravitate up, and we gravitate up because I'm faster than you, or I make more money than you, or because I'm a man, or because I know more Game of Thrones trivia than you. Like we gravitate, we create some context that helps us feel better about our position relative to some other person. And when we do that, we actually eliminate the opportunity for intimacy. And intimacy can only occur between same as. We're the same. We're on the same level. So contempt is this idea that somehow I'm better than you, and that I need to, demonstrate I need to make that clear. And the Gottman research has found that contempt is actually bad for your health. People who have contempt are more susceptible to communicable diseases. People who experience contempt are more susceptible to communicable diseases. So it's really a toxic trait that you would go to grandiosity relative to someone that you love. It just eliminates the opportunity for you to have any kind of meaningful connection or any kind of meaningful relationship.
So it's not only impacting your relationship, it impacts your health. And it comes from this place of, it can show up as self-righteousness that I know better. I'm more entitled to this, all of that. Is it something people cultivate? Does that come from our childhood? Is it getting born in the relationship?
It's a tough one. I think it's a tough one. I think part of it comes from the fact that we live and have for centuries, we live under patriarchy. And patriarchy says that that there has to be a winner and a loser. Patriarchy says somebody has to rise to the top and be the strongest. That energy is often shifted toward men. It's often shifted toward, men of a certain clique. The other appropriate boxes, I'm a heterosexual man, I'm a Christian man, I'm a wealthy man, I'm a white man, whatever it is. And all of these little checks have given us permission to rise up the ladder. And so if we're up the ladder, everybody's below us. And I think so part of what we have to acknowledge culturally is that the world is organized for there to be people at the top and people at the bottom. And so contempt is a natural outcome of that. I think, sure, some of us grow up in families that reinforce that you're better, that you're the best, and you strive for the best. And there's something good about that. There's something good about trying to be your best and trying to be, to thrive and to chase excellence. I think when you do that relative to the other, it just necessarily puts the other in a one-down position vis-a-vis you. And again, that's a hard place to come from when it comes to intimacy. What I always tell people is that the basis for contempt is always made up. It is invented. So, I went through a few, right? I said, I'm faster than you, or I make more money than you, or I know more trivia than you. All that is me trying to figure out if I'm not better than you because of this, then I'll be better than you because of that. And when you can change the landscape under somebody's feet like that, then again, it's not intimacy. It's just competition. I think couples who are striving for intimacy, particularly in the bedroom, need to find a way to communicate to one another. This is for us. This is for our benefit, that sex and sexuality and intimacy is about us feeling more connected, not about you or me. It's about us. And that's a tough spot for people to find, particularly when, again, for centuries, the world has been organized for it to be about me. How do I get ahead? How do I, even if it's not, how do I get my yacht? It's how do I feel safe? How do I feel sane? And what do I need to do to protect that?
Absolutely. And I think, especially for many people, having deep, kind of vulnerable, like that kind of like sexual connection that they want, it comes from the place of feeling truly seen and heard and validated. And there's a level of vulnerability that goes into it. So sometimes the things we do to protect ourselves gets in the way of us having the connections we want with our partner. And this is a pattern that I see a lot in my clients, from our listeners, and I'm sure that you've seen similar. Let me know what's your experience with that similar pattern. Is that many couples in long-term relationship, they start in a place of good enough sexual experiences. They are sexually connected. And then the relationship pattern happens. And because of all this NSO or like life transitions, they no longer feel like lover. So because of the relationship, they just focus on this PK negativity. They no longer have sex. So when the relationship improves, starting to be more sexual, that can be tricky, because now you're feeling like, I don't want to have sex with my family member or roommate. Like, our relationship is better, but I'm not drawn to this person. What recommendation do you have for those people that they found themselves in the place of, they work on some of the relationship parts, but they would like to now lean into sexual intimacy?
I think part of what part of what happens in long-term relationships is people forget what sex is for. When we first meet somebody, sex is for fun. It's for, maybe it's even for exercise, but it's like a job interview almost. It's like, is this good enough for me to keep doing this with you for a while, And then sex for a lot of people becomes about pregnancy, becomes about reproduction. And so who doesn't like sex is people who are trying to get pregnant and can't, like it's like, what a drag. And here we go. And we gotta, and you gotta, and we gotta, and I gotta, and it's gotta be in the, and that's hard. But let's say you've gotten the job and you made the babies and you're done with sex as a job interview and you're done with sex as reproduction. But now what is it for? And is it okay that it's for us? Is it okay that we carve out time for us? We've got kids. Is it okay that it's for pleasure? Well, we have responsibilities. How can we, and I think if you don't figure that out, if you don't suss that out with each other and you don't prioritize it, then it's easy to sort of have it fall down the list of things that deserve your attention. And so, here you are. And that's kind of how I think about it. I don't know if that's advice strictly, but usually when I'm talking to couples about trying to wake up their sex life, they have to face that question. What is it for? Why are we doing this? And I think the other question that people need to really explore is what counts. Because if sex is strictly vaginal intercourse that ends in orgasm for one or both of us, if that's what it is, that's a challenging target to hit 100% of the time, particularly if you're trying to orgasm together or something, and that's the only success. So does it count that we make out in the shower? Does it count that we just sleep naked every once in a while? Does it count that we have sex or oral sex and maybe there's no orgasm? Does that count? Or is it only this? Because if it's only this and it's, there's a lot of pressure to be successful, and that's pressure doesn't make sex great. Pressure makes sex challenging. So
I love all of that. I think kind of like prioritizing is really important. There is also, interestingly, some negative messaging around prioritizing sex. Like, I have couples that they have they're okay with prioritizing date night. But when I say, get a sitter so you can have sex, people feel bad about that. They feel, oh my God, why, what people think. Well, it's similar to any other aspect of your relationship. And you brought up such an important thing about broadening your definition of sex. I know for many women I work in my practice, if you focus, as you mentioned, only on intercourse in heterosexual relationship, many people will be less likely to engage. Like many women in perimenopause, postmenopause, intercourse could be painful. Desire might take a while for them to build up. So sex could be different from what it used to be. Could be so much better, but could be different. So if you're not open to experimenting with the sexual script, like your option might be more limited. Therefore, you might not be able to experience the pleasure that you're looking for.
Yeah, 100%.
So I think I like that people think about what can we do to cultivate more pleasure and what eroticism could look like for us. I love that you talked about like maybe cuddling, reading sexy books, whatever feels erotic to you.
The thing about prioritizing sex and the stigma around that, it's two things. One thing is we prioritize everything that's important to us, Like we schedule the gym, we schedule our meals, we schedule sleep, we schedule our job. So people who don't want to prioritize sex, part of what they're saying is it's actually not a priority. It's not important. If you go, oh, it's important, then you go, well, you got to prioritize it because we no longer live in the world, particularly if you've got kids and you've got, mismatched libido and you've got laundry on the floor. Spontaneous sex isn't as available as it used to be. The other thing is I did an interview with a woman named Susan Bratton, who is a sex coach and therapist. Mm-hmm. And she talks about scheduling erotic play dates. Mm-hmm. So we'll schedule date night, but we won't schedule sex. And I'm like, okay, that's actually, I can sort of see like you're not going to put sex on your calendar, but the idea of scheduling an erotic play date, again, can broaden the definition of what it is that we're working on, because maybe we're just working on like how to learn a new oral sex technique, or maybe we're learning on how to just feel your body. Literally just, I don't know, with a feather or something, literally just feel your body, because a lot of us aren't connected to our bodies. So an erotic play date doesn't have to be, we scheduled sex. It could be, we scheduled a time to learn something new, practice a skill, be innovative. Like, that's okay. Why not?
I love that. And there are research on kind of flow state around sexual kind of connection. And then say when you're doing something new slightly, like I think the magic number is 8 to 10%, then you are more in the flow state. So maybe you can kind of experiment with doing something challenging. So it can help you to be more present, because we all know that great sex is like the one that you feel in your body and excited and present. So I know that you're wealth of great information. I noticed that we're toward the end of our time. You have your own show, you have your practice. So for our listeners, Zach, they want to learn more about these topics. Where can they find you?
Thank you for asking. The internet is a place, I think I'm the only Zach Brittle on the internet. So my first name is Zach, C-A-C-H. My last name is Brittle, rhymes with little. It's like fragile. ZachBrittle.com is my website. I do have a podcast that comes out every week. It's called Marriage Therapy Radio. Comes out on Tuesdays. The format of that show right now is that I'm interviewing couples and just trying to figure out like how to help people get more perspective on what relationships are like and how relationships work. And then I've been messing around with writing. I have a blog. It's called Stuff I Write. It's on Substack. And so I don't know if you're interested to know what I think about relationships, you could check out the podcast. If you're interested to know what I think about music and movies and other stuff, you can check out the blog. But if you're looking for clinical support, ZachBrittle.com is the best way to start that process.
Well, amazing. The link to those information will be in the show notes. Zach, thank you so much for coming in this show. It was such a pleasure to have you on our show, and hopefully we'll have you on our future episodes.
Yeah, I'd love to come back and, stay warm down there in LA. I'm going to go put my raincoat on and go home. So,
all right. Have a beautiful day. Bye there.
Okay. I want to thank Dr. Moali for having me on the Sexology Podcast. Go ahead and check out more episodes of her podcast if you're interested. It's called Sexology. You can find it anywhere podcasts are sold. Also, don't forget to check out OMGS if it's a thing that you are interested in. If sex and sexuality is a thing that you're interested in developing inside your relationship, OMGS is one of the coolest tools that I have found to keep adding content all the time. I know my clients use it. Rebecca and I have enjoyed learning a little bit more about what's going on over there. And the coolest thing is it's not a subscription base. It's literally a one-time cost. I think it's $75. And you get all of these videos for life. So best thing to do is to go to marriagetherapyradio.com, click on the link that we have there. And then, of course, you can continue to support the podcast by going to patreon.com/marriagetherapyradio, following us on Instagram, spreading the word, leaving 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. All of it helps us continue to grow this show, bring you very very cool interviews, which we'll have a whole bunch more when I get back from my trip. For now, I'll thank you for the time and attention you're putting into making your relationship better today than it was yesterday.
At Arizona State University, we're bringing world-class education from our globally acclaimed faculty to you. Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online. That's a degree better. Learn more at asuonline.asu.edu.